Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker, a time of plagues, punishments, and pottage. We're diving into what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget the castles and chivalry Hollywood sold you. The truth, you probably wouldn't last a single day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes in the year 1325. The good news is you are alive. The bad news is the fleas are too. The cold air penetrates your bones, sending a shiver down your spine that not even your thick woolen clothes can protect you from. Your bed is not the memory foam mattress you are used to. It is a pile of rotten straw infested with insects and stinking of mold and animal manure. The floor beneath you is nothing but damp, cold earth, soaked from countless rainy days, creating a permanent chill that rises through your body. The darkness around you is absolute, not the comfortable darkness of your bedroom with the subtle glow of electronics or the soft light filtering through the curtains. This is a primitive darkness, interrupted only by the faintest glimmer of moonlight slipping through the cracks of your wooden shelter. As your eyes adjust, you begin to make out shapes in the gloom, the outlines of your family members, all huddled together on the same pile of straw, seeking warmth. There is no privacy here, no personal space, just bodies pressed against bodies in a desperate attempt to survive the night. The sounds are also strange. Not the gentle hum of a refrigerator or the distant noise of passing cars. Instead, you hear the low moan of the wind as it finds every crevice in your poorly built dwelling, the occasional rustle of livestock in the adjacent pen, separated from your living space by nothing more than a crude wooden partition. Sometimes you hear a baby's cry from a neighboring house or the hoarse cough of an elderly villager who may not live to see the next winter. You stretch and immediately regret it. Your body aches from yesterday's work. 14 hours toiling in the fields with tools that were rudimentary at best and torturous at worst. Your hands are calloused and cracked, your joints swollen from the repetitive motions of harvesting crops or chopping wood. There is no hot shower waiting for you, no painkillers to ease the discomfort. This pain is your constant companion, a reminder that survival in this era demands every ounce of strength you have. Then comes the smell. Your own unwashed body, the bucket of waste in the corner serving as a toilet, the animals just a few steps away, the smoke from last night's cooking fire that never fully escaped through the hole in the ceiling. There is no concept of freshness here. Everything carries the mustiness of perpetual dampness, the acidity of sweat and exhaustion, the earthy odor of dirt and animals living in close quarters. Hunger gnaws at your stomach. Not the casual hunger of the 21st century, where a meal is just a delivery app away. This is a deep, aching emptiness, reminding you that food is never guaranteed. Yesterday's meal was a watery soup with a few vegetables, and if you were lucky, a small piece of salted meat. Today might be the same, or worse, depending on the season and your family's luck. You sit up slowly, feeling every muscle protest. There is no time to ease into the day, no morning routine of coffee and scrolling through the news. Dawn is breaking, and with it comes the expectation of work. Every moment of daylight is precious in a world without reliable artificial lighting. Your day begins when the sun rises and ends long after it sets. Your evening hours spent in the dim light of a tallow candle or a rustic oil lamp, luxuries that many cannot afford to burn for long. Outside your dwelling, the village is already stirring. Medieval life is communal by necessity. You know every person in your small community, their strengths and weaknesses, their joys and sorrows. This intimacy brings both comfort and conflict. There is support in times of need, but also the weight of constant social scrutiny. There are no secrets here, no privacy, no concept of minding your own business. Your life is intertwined with everyone else's in a complex web of obligations, debts, and mutual aid. The feudal lord's castle looms on the hill, dominating the village. Its stone walls and slate roof stand in stark contrast to your humble dwelling. It represents both protection and oppression. The Lord offers security against external threats, but demands much in return. Labor, produce, loyalty, deference. You are not a slave, but you are not free in any sense your modern mind would recognize. You are bound to this land, to this Lord, by birth and circumstance. As you prepare to face the day, you realize how completely alien this world is from everything you know. The comforts you took for granted, clean water, abundant food, medical care, leisure time, are rare luxuries here, if they exist at all. This is a world of scarcity, of relentless work, of lives that are, in the words of Thomas Hobbes, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Welcome to the Middle Ages. You have been awake for only 5 minutes, and you already understand why you wouldn't last a day here. But the day has just begun, and many more challenges await. As the dim morning light filters through the cracks in your hut's walls, you feel the need to empty your bladder. But there is no bathroom to go to, no toilet to flush, no soft toilet paper waiting for you. You get up and walk to the corner where the waste bucket shared by the entire family sits. The smell is unbearable, but you are already partially numb to it after breathing the stale air all night. Your bowels are also protesting, but you prefer to wait to relieve yourself outside, away from the hut, as is the custom. Privacy is an almost non-existent concept. For the wealthier people in the cities, there might be a latrine, a small chamber with a wooden seat over a receptacle, or if they are very lucky, a cesspit. For peasants like you, there is only the communal bucket or a walk to the edge of the thicket. Once that first need of the day is taken care of, you think about washing. In your modern 21st century home, you would turn on the tap and instantly have clean, crystal clear water at a controlled temperature. Here the morning cleaning is a rare luxury that few practice daily. Instead, you dip your hands into a basin of water collected from the communal well the day before. The water is ice cold and slightly cloudy. You splash some on your face and the back of your neck, feeling a shiver run through your body. Full baths are something that happens maybe once a month, if that. In winter, many go the entire season without a single bath. The church teaches that nudity and bodily vanity are sinful, and there are persistent rumors that water, especially hot water, opens the pores and lets diseases into the body. Some doctors of the time even warn against frequent bathing, claiming it weakens the body. You would like to brush your teeth, but there is no minty toothpaste or soft bristled toothbrush available. Some people use rough cloths and herbal mixtures to clean their teeth. Others chew twigs from certain trees until they fray into a rudimentary brush. Many simply do not clean their teeth, which is why so many adults around you have already lost several. a sight that will become familiar as your medieval journey continues. No deodorant, no shampoo, no conditioner, no toothpaste, no toilet paper, no commercial soap, no running water. The list of absences is endless. The concept of cleanliness here is fundamentally different. The smell of sweat and dirt is not an aberration, it is the natural smell of humanity. You notice your skin itching intensely in several places. It's not just the discomfort of the rough clothes or the straw mattress, it's parasites. Lice, fleas, and ticks are constant companions for almost everyone in this era. They hide in clothes, hair, and bedding, and there is no effective chemical treatment to eliminate them. The best you can do is to occasionally comb your scalp and pick the parasites out one by one, a tedious task that families often perform for each other during moments of relative rest. As you get ready for the day, you realize there are no mirrors to check your appearance. The few mirrors that exist are luxury items, small, imprecise, made of polished metal, and available only to the very rich. Most people live their entire lives without ever seeing a clear reflection of themselves, knowing their faces only through the eyes of others and perhaps the occasional distorted glimpse in still water. Now it's time to dress properly for the day. Your clothes hang on a hook on the wall, the same ones you wore yesterday, the day before, and will probably wear tomorrow. There are no closets full of options, no washing machines to keep everything clean and fresh. The average person in this time owns only 2 sets of clothes, one to wear while the other is perhaps being washed and dried. Many have only what they are wearing. Your clothing is made of coarse wool or thick linen, woven on hand looms and sewn by hand. There is no elastic, no zippers, no Velcro. Everything is tied, laced, or fastened with rudimentary buttons made of bone, wood, or, for the more affluent, metal. Underwear, when it exists, is uncomfortable and rarely changed. Socks, when available, are often patched repeatedly until they are more patch than original sock. You put on your boots if you are lucky enough to own a pair. Many peasants work barefoot during the warmer months, saving their precious footwear for winter or special occasions like church visits. Boots are custom made by local artisans, expensive and designed for durability, not comfort. No ergonomic insoles, no cushioning, just rigid leather that might, over time, mold minimally to your feet. As you get ready, you notice small sores and rashes on your skin. Without antibiotics or modern treatments, minor infections are part of daily life. Cuts, scratches, and sores take longer to heal and often leave scars. Skin conditions like eczema, psoriasis, or simple irritations from rough materials are treated with homemade ointments of varying effectiveness, often based more on superstition than medical science. You are ready to face the day, but you already miss the comfort of a modern bathroom, a hot shower, refreshing toothpaste, and soft, clean clothes. In the 21st century, you might spend 30 minutes on your morning routine. Here you have done much less in terms of hygiene, but you have already consumed precious daylight hours. Now, with hunger in your stomach and still feeling uncomfortably dirty by modern standards, you prepare for the next challenge. The medieval breakfast, if you can even call it that. A medieval peasant's kitchen has nothing in common with your modern kitchen. There is no clear division between rooms. The food preparation area is often just a corner of the single room that makes up the entire house. In the center of the house, or perhaps against a wall, is the hearth, the literal and figurative heart of the home. It is the only source of heat, the only means of cooking, and on dark nights the main source of light. There is no exhaust fan to carry the smoke away. Instead, it must rise and exit through a hole in the roof. But the system is imperfect. The inside of the house is permanently hazed by a thin layer of soot that settles on every surface and in your lungs. The fire must be kept lit, or at least the embers preserved. Starting a new fire without modern matches or lighters is a time-consuming and difficult task involving flint, tinder, and patient blowing to turn a spark into a flame. You approach the area where your family prepares meals. There is no pantry full of food, no refrigerator humming softly in the corner. Food storage is a constant challenge in this era. Meat, when available, is salted, smoked, or dried for preservation. Grains are stored in wooden chests, always under threat of infestation by rats, insects, and mold. Vegetables might be pickled in vinegar or salt or stored in cold cellars during the winter, but the availability of fresh food is seasonal and precarious. Breakfast will not be a varied buffet of options. There will be no coffee, tea, fresh orange juice, or smoothies. Most likely you will eat a thick slice of dark rye bread, not the fluffy soft bread you know, but a dense, heavy loaf, often stale. The appearance of the bread is also different. Made with less refined grains, it is dark and coarse in texture, often with small impurities like millstone fragments or even insects mixed into the flour. Along with the bread, you might have some hard cheese produced within the community. Without refrigeration, cheeses need to be aged and hardened to last, resulting in intense flavors that would shock a modern palate accustomed to milder products. Beer, even in the morning, is a common beverage, not to get drunk, but because fermentation makes the water safer to drink than the untreated water from the local well or river. If you are lucky, you might have some oatmeal or barley porridge, cooked slowly over the fire overnight. No refined sugar to sweeten it. That is a rare and expensive luxury reserved for the very rich. Honey, when available, is the main sweetener, but even it is used sparingly as it is too valuable for daily consumption. Fresh fruits are only available when in season and if they grow locally. There are no bananas or pineapples imported from other continents, no greenhouse cultivation. In winter, the available fruits are apples, pears, plums, and various wild berries, all only during their brief natural harvest period. Animal protein is a luxury for most peasants. Red meat rarely appears on the table except on special occasions, or when a work animal needs to be slaughtered due to age or illness. Pigs are more common in the peasant diet, as they can be raised on food scraps and require less space than cattle. Chickens provide eggs, a valuable source of protein, before ending up in the pot when their production declines. Fish are important for communities near rivers or the sea, and as part of religious observances, as the church prescribed meatless days. But even fish is often eaten salted or smoked, not fresh, unless you live very close to the source. The diet is monotonous and repetitive without the endless variety you are accustomed to. There are no different ethnic cuisines each night, no exotic recipes from cookbooks. The same simple meals are repeated day after day with minor seasonal variations. The concept of a balanced diet does not yet exist. Vitamins, minerals, proteins, and carbohydrates are unknown terms. People eat what is available and what they can afford, often leading to chronic nutritional deficiencies. Scurvy, vitamin C deficiency, beriberi, thiamine deficiency, rickets, vitamin D deficiency, and pellagra, niacin deficiency are common, although they do not yet have these names. Even drinking water is an uncertain luxury. Communal wells or local springs can be contaminated, especially in larger settlements where human and animal waste seeps into the ground. Water is rarely boiled before consumption, and modern filters are centuries away. Drinking untreated water often means risking debilitating or even fatal gastrointestinal diseases. You finish your simple morning meal, which provided calories but little sensory pleasure. There is no moment to savor a cup of coffee while checking the news on your phone. Instead, you are already thinking about the long day of work ahead, a day full of strenuous physical tasks that will require every calorie you just consumed, and probably more. The medieval diet, especially for peasants, was about survival, not pleasure. Eating was not a hobby or a cultural experience as it can be today. It was simply a basic need, met as efficiently as possible with limited resources. And as you sweep the last crumbs from the rustic table, it is already time to head to the fields. The workday began at sunrise and will not end until long after sunset. Welcome to the next challenge of your medieval day, the ceaseless labor required just to survive. When you leave your hut, you are greeted by the cold, damp morning and the sight of other villagers also heading to the fields. There is no weekend waiting for you in medieval life. The concept of regular days off simply does not exist as we know it today. Sunday is theoretically reserved for church and rest, but even then, the animals need to be fed, the cows milked, and essential tasks completed. The work that awaits you is not only physically exhausting, it is incredibly repetitive and technically rudimentary. The tools at your disposal are primitive versions of those you would find in a history museum. A hoe with a rough wooden handle that blisters your hands even through calluses. A sickle for cutting grain that forces you to bend at a painful angle for hours. A plow pulled by oxen that requires constant strength to keep it on course. In your modern life, you are accustomed to ergonomic workspaces, chairs with lumbar support, keyboards positioned at the right height to avoid wrist strain. Here, every movement of your work assaults your body. Bending to plant, squatting to harvest, lifting heavy loads without proper technique, your body suffers continuous wear and tear that over a lifetime will result in visible deformities, permanently damaged joints, and chronic pain with no cure or relief. The pace of work is dictated by daylight and the seasons, not by a time clock. During the summer months, you might work 16 hours or more, using every moment of natural light. In winter, the days are shorter, but that doesn't mean rest, just different tasks. Mending tools and equipment, processing stored food, making necessary household items, cutting and hauling firewood. For a woman in the Middle Ages, the work is equally arduous, though often different. In addition to frequently helping in the fields during planting and harvesting, there is endless domestic work, grinding grain by hand into flour, a process that can take hours, baking bread, which includes kneading heavy dough without electric mixers, spinning wool or linen into thread, another hours-long task, weaving thread into cloth on the hand loom, sewing clothes by hand, washing clothes by scrubbing them on rough boards with homemade soap that barely removes stains, cooking over an open fire without precise temperature control, caring for sick children and the elderly. The list goes on and on. The concept of retirement is non-existent. People work as long as they are physically able, until age or illness incapacitates them. When that happens, they depend entirely on their family for support. There are no pensions, nursing homes, or social safety nets. Many elderly people continue to contribute as they can, caring for young children, doing light tasks like mending clothes or peeling vegetables, and sharing knowledge and skills with the younger generations. As you work in the fields, you realize how every task is interdependent on the others. You are not a specialist performing a single function repeatedly. You are a generalist who needs to understand the entire cycle of food and essential goods production. There is no assembly line or hyper-specialization. A medieval peasant needs to know a little bit of everything. Agriculture, animal husbandry, basic carpentry to repair the house, food preservation, even rudimentary herbal medicine to treat common injuries and illnesses. Work is not just physically demanding. It is mentally stressful in a completely different way from modern workplace stress. There is no worry about project deadlines or performance reviews, but a constant anxiety about basic survival. Will this year's harvest be enough? What if too much rain rots the grain in the field? What if pests destroy the crops? What if the animals get sick? What if winter lasts longer than expected and supplies run out before the next harvest? Every decision carries the weight of survival. Planting more of one grain as insurance or risking focusing on a single higher yield crop. Slaughtering an animal for immediate meat or keeping it alive for future breeding, using precious seeds as food during scarcity or saving them for the next season's planting, betting on survival until then. Sweat pours down your face as you work under the sun. There is no sunscreen to prevent burns, only rudimentary straw hats when available. Your skin is constantly exposed to the elements, scorching sun in summer, cutting winds in winter, rain and moisture that cause fungal infections and cracked skin. Injuries are frequent and rarely treated properly. A cut from a sickle can easily become infected without antibiotics. A fall from the barn can result in broken bones that are, at best, set by someone with practical experience but no formal anatomical knowledge, and then left to heal on their own, often incorrectly. Hernias from heavy lifting are common and debilitating. Crushing injuries from presses or mills can mean amputation without anesthesia and almost certain subsequent infection. Even the most basic protective equipment is absent. Ergonomic gloves, safety glasses, ear protection against the deafening noise of mills, or masks to filter the dust from threshing, which over the years causes chronic respiratory diseases. As you work, you think about lunch. There will be no comfortable break in an air-conditioned cafeteria. Your lunch will probably be another piece of bread, perhaps with a bit of cheese or an onion, eaten quickly in the shade of a tree if you are lucky. There is no regulated lunch hour. You eat when you can between tasks, often with hands dirty from work and no place to wash them properly. The water you drink during the day comes from a nearby stream or was brought from home in a leather bag or wooden canteen. Lukewarm, unfiltered, and often contaminated with microbes your modern immune system has never encountered and against which it has little defense. Around you, you see other peasants in similar conditions. Some look incredibly old, their faces weathered by the sun, and their bodies bent from constant labor. But when you ask, you find out they are only 40, an age considered the prime of one's professional life in your time, but which here marks someone as an elder. Young children, 5 or 6 years old, are already working in the fields, performing simple but essential tasks. Scaring birds from the crops, collecting eggs, feeding small animals. Their education comes not from schools with carefully planned curricula, but from observation and gradual participation in adult work, learning by doing from the earliest age. As the day wears on, your body protests. Muscles you didn't even know you had ache deeply. Your skin is irritated from the constant friction with rough clothes and tools. Your eyes burn with sweat and dust. Your throat is dry. Your legs tremble with exhaustion. But the work continues. It must continue, because stopping means not surviving. There are no painkillers to take when you get home at night. No physical therapy to correct your posture or strengthen specific muscles. No imaging diagnostics to identify joint damage. Only herbal poultices of questionable effectiveness. Perhaps a swig of homemade alcohol to numb the pain momentarily. And the resignation that tomorrow it all starts again. Hard, physical, and relentless work is the reality of medieval life. It is not a choice or something to be avoided. It is the very definition of existence, and you are only halfway through your first day in this strange and merciless world. As the day progresses and your body continues to protest against the incessant work, you feel a sharp pain in your abdomen. In your modern life, you would take a painkiller, and if it persisted, you would make a doctor's appointment. Perhaps get blood tests, an ultrasound, or even a CT scan to identify the exact cause. In the Middle Ages, your options are drastically different. The medieval conception of disease is fundamentally different from modern medical understanding. The theory of the four humors, inherited from the ancient Greeks and Romans, dominates medical thought. According to this theory, the body contains four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health depends on their harmonious balance, and disease results from imbalances. Your diagnosis would not come from laboratory tests or detailed images of your body's interior. Instead, a medieval doctor, if you had access to one, which is unlikely for a common peasant, would primarily observe external signs: the color of your skin and tongue, the odor of your breath and excrement, the appearance of your urine, uroscopy, and perhaps your pulse. For most rural people, there are no doctors available. Instead, you would rely on the local wise woman, the itinerant barber surgeon who occasionally visits the village, the herbalist monk from the nearby monastery, or simply folk knowledge passed down through generations. The available treatments would be, by modern standards, ineffective at best and actively harmful at worst. For your abdominal pain, you might receive bloodletting to restore humoral balance, performed with leeches or direct cuts on the veins. The procedure often weakened already sick patients rather than curing them. Purgatives or emetics to expel the disease through forced evacuations or induced vomiting would again often leave patients dangerously dehydrated. Herbal poultices and potions, some containing genuinely medicinal ingredients like willow bark, which contains aspirin-like compounds, but mixed with ineffective or dangerous elements without standardized dosages. Amulets, prayers, and rituals based more on superstition and religious beliefs than proven medical efficacy. Disease was often seen as divine punishment for sins or the result of black magic or the evil eye. Surgery, when performed, was a horrific experience. Without anesthesia beyond alcohol or insufficient doses of opium, procedures were done with the patient fully conscious, feeling every cut. Without understanding germ theory, instruments were not sterilized, and surgeons often did not wash their hands between patients or after handling corpses. Post-operative infections were virtually guaranteed. If your abdominal pain was appendicitis, a relatively simple surgical problem in the modern world, it would be almost certainly fatal in the Middle Ages The same would be true for strangulated hernias, intestinal obstructions, perforated ulcers, and countless other acute abdominal conditions. Chronic diseases would simply be a part of your life with no hope of cure or effective treatment. Arthritis, tuberculosis known as consumption, asthma, epilepsy, often seen as demonic possession, diabetes, all these conditions ran their natural courses without effective intervention. Even conditions considered minor today could be severe or fatal. A dental infection could spread to the brain. A small cut could lead to gangrene and death. A common diarrhea could cause fatal dehydration, especially in children and the elderly. A simple pneumonia was often a death sentence. Pregnancy and childbirth were periods of extreme danger for women. Without prenatal care, safe cesarean sections, sterilized forceps, or an understanding of the need for hygiene during delivery, many women died from hemorrhage, eclampsia, or puerperal fever, postpartum infection. Maternal mortality rates were frighteningly high. Perhaps 1 in every 10 pregnancies ended with the mother's death. Infant mortality was even more devastating, with estimates suggesting that 30% or more of children did not survive beyond the age of 5. For those living in cities, the situation was worse in many respects. Population density combined with inadequate sanitation created ideal conditions for the spread of disease. Water contaminated by human waste transmitted cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever. Narrow streets and overcrowded houses facilitated respiratory diseases like tuberculosis. And then there were the epidemics, catastrophic events that periodically swept through entire regions. The most infamous, the Black Death of the 14th century, killed about 1/3 of the European population. Without understanding germ theory, without antibiotics, without vaccines, the population was completely vulnerable to these devastating outbreaks. Hospitals, where they existed, were nothing like modern institutions. Many were run by religious orders and functioned more as hospices for the dying or shelters for the poor and pilgrims than as medical treatment centers. Many patients often shared the same bed, increasing the risks of cross-contamination. For the common person, death was a constant and familiar companion. Most people witnessed the death of siblings, friends, parents, and children repeatedly throughout their lives. It was not uncommon to give birth to 8 or 10 children only to see half or more die before adulthood. Life expectancy at birth was approximately 30 to 35 years. This does not mean that no one lived beyond that. Many who survived childhood could reach 60 or 70. But it reflects the high infant mortality and the many dangers that could shorten a life. As you endure your abdominal pain, which thankfully seems to be subsiding now, perhaps just a cramp due to the strange diet and stress, you realize how vulnerable you are in this world. A simple cold could turn into pneumonia. A small wound could become a fatal infection. A toothache could be the start of a deadly abscess. And if you get seriously ill, there is no sick leave, no paid time off. If you cannot work, there will be no income. If the illness is prolonged, your meager resources will soon be exhausted. Charity from the community and the church might help for a while, but resources are limited for everyone. In the end, a prolonged illness often meant misery, not just for the sick person, but for the entire family that depended on their labor. Medieval medicine was not just technically deficient by modern standards. It operated in a completely different paradigm, where empirical observation and controlled testing of theories were not standard practices. Many treatments persisted for centuries, not because they worked, but because they fit the prevailing theories, no matter how many patients died under such care. As you continue your workday, now with a new awareness of the fragility of life in this era, you cannot help but marvel at something you had never considered before. Simply survive into adulthood in the Middle Ages was in itself a remarkable achievement. As the sun crosses the sky and you continue your exhaustive work in the fields, you become increasingly aware of something you barely noticed at first, the heavy cloak of social structure that envelops every aspect of medieval life. In your modern life, you are accustomed to a degree of social mobility and personal autonomy that would be incomprehensible to the medieval mind. In the Middle Ages, your birth not only determines your starting position in life, it largely determines your entire destiny. You, as a peasant, occupy a fixed place in an extremely rigid hierarchy. Above you is your local feudal lord, the knight or noble who technically owns the land, and to whom you owe obligations in the form of labor and a share of your produce. Above him is a greater lord, perhaps an earl or duke, and above that the king. Below you in the social hierarchy are only the truly landless and the serfs, who have even fewer rights and security than you. This is not a hierarchy you have any realistic hope of climbing. Nobility is not just a matter of wealth, it is a matter of birth. No matter how intelligent, hardworking, or innovative you are, the chances of a peasant becoming a noble are almost non-existent. At best, with extraordinary luck and skill, you can become a successful artisan or merchant if you manage to escape the ties of rural life, a prospect few achieved. Serfdom, a status between freedom and slavery, is the reality for many peasants. If you are a serf, you are legally bound to the land. You cannot simply decide to move to another village or city without your lord's permission, which would likely be denied. You cannot freely choose your spouse, as marriages between serfs of different lords complicate property rights over any children born from the union. Feudal obligations shape your daily life. Besides working on your own piece of land for subsistence, you must dedicate a specific number of days, perhaps 30 to 60 per year, to working directly on the Lord's lands, the corvée. During the crucial periods of planting and harvesting, when every hour of work on your own field is precious, you may be summoned to fulfill your obligations on the Lord's lands, potentially compromising your own harvest and your family's survival. You also face a series of feudal fees and taxes. If you want to use the Lord's mill to grind your grain, and often there is no other permitted alternative, you must pay a substantial fee, often a tenth or more of your flour. If you want to bake bread, you may be required to use the Lord's oven for a fee. When you sell goods at the local market, you must pay a toll. When you inherit your father's land, you must pay an inheritance tax. If you want to get married, you may need to pay for the privilege. The church represents another layer of authority and demands its own set of tributes. The tithe, theoretically 10% of all your production, goes to the church, regardless of how much you have already paid to your secular lord. In some places and times, you might pay first fruits, the first harvest or the first animal born in the year, in addition to the regular tithe. The laws that govern your life are not applied equally to everyone. Medieval justice operates on a sliding scale with different standards for different social classes. A noble who commits a crime against a peasant might get away with a small fine or no punishment at all. A peasant who commits a crime against a noble might face mutilation or execution. Even among the peasants themselves, those with more resources to pay fines or bribes have a better chance of lighter sentences. Trials rarely depend on carefully collected and examined evidence. Instead, oaths of character, testimonies from respectable people, and even ordeals or judicial duels can determine the verdict. If you are accused of a crime, your reputation in the community may matter more to your fate than the facts of the case. At the local level, village life is governed by customs and traditions with the force of law. The village typically meets periodically as a manorial court, where disputes are resolved, infractions against custom are judged, and collective decisions about planting, grazing, and the use of common lands are made. Although it offers some degree of local self-government, this system still operates within the strict limits of the feudal hierarchy. The pressure for social conformity is intense. In a small community where everyone knows each other's business, any deviation from the norm is quickly noticed and often punished. There is no privacy as you understand it. Your neighbors know when you wake up, what you eat, whom you speak to, how you treat your spouse. Social ostracism in such an environment is not just uncomfortable, it can be fatal in a society where survival depends on community cooperation. Marriage is not primarily about romantic love, but an economic and social alliance. Marriages are often arranged or strongly influenced by parents with practical considerations like dowries, land, and family connections taking precedence over personal compatibility or affection. Once married, divorce is virtually impossible for commoners, though informal separations might occur. For women, the restrictions are even harsher. A peasant woman works as hard as any man in the fields, and at home, but has few independent legal rights. Unmarried, she is under her father's authority. Married, under her husband's. She cannot own property independently in many regions, cannot initiate legal proceedings in her own name, and has extremely limited life options outside of marriage, except perhaps joining a convent, which usually requires a substantial dowry, or certain occupations like brewing or trade, often as a widow continuing her husband's business. War, when it happens, is not something that occurs only in distant lands conducted by professional armies. When feudal lords go to war, their lands, including your village, become battlefields. Armies on the move often live off the land, taking food, animals, and anything of value from peasant communities. The destruction of a harvest by passing troops can mean famine in the following winter. Houses burned as a tactic of war leave entire families homeless. And you, the common peasant, have few defenses against such calamities. Even religion, which could offer spiritual comfort, comes with its own set of hierarchies and obligations. The Catholic Church dominates all aspects of spiritual life and many aspects of secular life as well. To question dogma is heresy. To fail to participate in religious rituals can lead to suspicion and ostracism. Religious festivals provide rare moments of joy and celebration, but also impose periods of fasting and penance that add another burden to an already difficult life. However, within these severe restrictions, the medieval community also offers something increasingly rare in the modern world: a deep sense of belonging and shared purpose. You know your place in the world, limited as it may be, and you exist within a network of mutually dependent relationships that, despite the inherent exploitation, provides a rudimentary form of social security. When a family loses their home to fire, the village mobilizes to rebuild it. When someone is too sick to work, neighbors help ensure their land is cared for. Celebrations, weddings, seasonal festivals, holy days are true community efforts where everyone contributes and participates. There is a shared rhythm of life, synchronized with the seasons and the religious calendar, creating a sense of continuity and meaning. It is a world of brutally limited possibilities, but also of intense human connections. A world where you would never experience the anonymous loneliness of the modern city, but also never know the freedom to reinvent yourself or choose your own path in life. As the day wears on and you continue your work in the fields, this complex social web envelops you as tightly as a rough woolen clothes you wear. You are not just an individual struggling for survival. You are a knot in an ancient social network, your role written long before your birth, your possibilities limited by forces you barely understand, much less challenge. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, you feel a deep weariness in your bones after hours of physical labor. But as you return to your village, a new awareness begins to take shape in your mind. The perception of the countless dangers that lurk in every corner of this medieval world. In your modern life, safety is something you rarely question. Buildings are constructed according to strict codes. Food is inspected by government agencies, water is treated to eliminate pathogens, and streets are patrolled by professional police forces. Danger exists, certainly, but it is an anomaly, an intrusion into a world that is presumed to be safe. In the Middle Ages, danger is not the exception. It is the natural state of things. Safety, when it exists, is fragile and temporary. Your home, for example, does not offer the protection you take for granted. Built with flammable materials like wood, straw, and thatch, often with an open fire in the center and no proper chimney, it represents a constant fire risk. There are no smoke alarms, fire extinguishers, or professional fire brigades. A fire that starts at night while everyone is sleeping can quickly consume an entire house and potentially the entire village as the buildings are clustered together. If a house catches fire, the main strategy is to demolish the neighboring houses to create a fire break. Little consolation for those who lose their homes in the process. Natural predators pose a threat that rarely concerns modern urban or suburban dwellers. Wolves are not just characters in fairy tales. They are real animals that, especially during harsh winters when prey is scarce, can attack humans, particularly children or lone travelers. Bears, wild boars, and other large animals can be lethal dangers for peasants working alone in fields or forests. Crime is a constant reality, aggravated by the lack of organized law enforcement. There is no professional police force to call if you are robbed or attacked. Justice is administered locally, often by the feudal lord or his representatives, and tends to be severe but inconsistent. Thieves might be hanged for petty theft, while murderers sometimes escape with fines if they have the means to pay and the right connections. Bandits and outlaws lurk in the forests and on the roads between settlements. Traveling even short distances carries significant risks, especially if you appear to have anything of value. Merchants travel in groups for mutual protection. Pilgrims form caravans for the same reason. Traveling at night is avoided whenever possible. The darkness belongs to wolves, bandits, and the ghostly creatures that populate the medieval imagination. War, as mentioned before, is not a distant event, but a calamity that can arrive directly at your doorstep. When armies march, whether allied or enemy, the peasants suffer. Soldiers requisition food, livestock, and shelter. Resistance can result in violence, rape, or death. Even in times of nominal peace, unemployed mercenaries or soldiers on leave can pose serious threats to isolated villages. Famine is a constant shadow hanging over medieval communities. A single year of bad harvests due to weather, insect infestations, plant diseases, or war can deplete stored reserves and lead to severe shortages. Great famines occurred with frightening regularity, perhaps once or twice a generation in many regions. During these times, people ate what they could find: tree bark, roots, weeds normally considered inedible, even boiled leather. The most vulnerable, young children, and the elderly, died first. Diseases spread rapidly among populations weakened by hunger. Some famines reduced regional populations by 10% or more. Natural disasters occurred without warning and without scientific understanding of their causes. There were no weather forecasts to warn of severe storms, floods, or impending droughts. There were no early warning systems for forest fires. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions happened without explanation, often interpreted as divine wrath, leaving people with no mitigation strategies beyond prayers and penance. The food itself could be dangerous in ways that rarely concern modern consumers. Ergotism, poisoning from a fungus that grows on rye and other grains in damp conditions, could cause hallucinations, convulsions, gangrene, and death. Without understanding the cause, outbreaks of St. Anthony's fire, as it was known, were often attributed to supernatural causes. Spoiled or contaminated food was consumed out of necessity, especially during shortages, leading to chronic gastrointestinal illnesses. The tools and utensils used daily were inherently more dangerous than their modern counterparts. Without safety features or guards, axes, sickles, plows, looms, and spinning wheels all carried significant risks of serious injury during normal use. There were no safety glasses, cut-resistant gloves, or steel-toed boots. An injury that today would require a few stitches and perhaps a brief medical leave could easily lead to the loss of a limb or death from infection in the Middle Ages. The buildings themselves were dangerous. Beyond the risk of fire, built without standardized building codes, often using inferior materials and improvised techniques, structures could collapse without warning. Steep stairs without handrails, uneven floors, low ceilings with exposed beams, and inadequate lighting all contributed to frequent accidents. The smoke from open hearths without proper ventilation caused chronic respiratory problems. Childhood was particularly dangerous. Without modern concepts of child safety, constant supervision, or even an understanding of developmental stages, accidents were extremely common. Young children fell into open fires, drowned in wells and rivers, poisoned themselves with toxic plants, fell from heights, were trampled by large animals, or suffered countless other accidents that would be considered easily preventable today. Even leisure and celebrations carried risks. Festivals and gatherings often involved heavy alcohol consumption, leading to violence and accidents. Games and sports had no protective equipment or safety rules. Serious injuries were common, even during recreational activities. Beyond the tangible physical dangers, there was the constant psychological weight of fear. Without a scientific understanding of natural phenomena, many common events were interpreted through a supernatural lens. Thunder and lightning were not understandable electrical discharges, but manifestations of divine wrath. Eclipses were not predictable astronomical events, but frightening omens. Diseases were not caused by identifiable microbes, but by malignant miasmas, humoral imbalances, or divine punishment for sins. This constant sense of vulnerability produced a mindset fundamentally different from the presumed safety of modern life. People lived with an acute awareness of the fragility of life and the ever-present proximity of death. This was not an abstract anxiety, but a daily reality, visible in every funeral, every sick child, every harsh winter or meager harvest. And yet amid these constant dangers, life went on. People married, had children, celebrated festivals, told stories around the fire. They found joy and meaning, even while living literally on the edge of the abyss. This resilience, this ability to create purposeful lives despite constant threats, is perhaps one of the most profound lessons we can draw from the medieval experience. As you return to the village at dusk, every shadow seems to hide a potential threat. But you also notice how the other peasants returning from the fields talk and laugh together, how the children play despite the dangers around them, how the smoke rising from the chimneys signals homes where, against all odds, people have found ways to create havens of relative safety and comfort in a relentlessly hostile world. Your first day in the medieval world is coming to an end. You are exhausted, dirty, sore, and hungry, but you are alive. And in this time and place, that in itself is a remarkable achievement. When the sun sets completely and the shadows lengthen until they disappear into total darkness, you experience something you have rarely, if ever, felt in your modern life. True, absolute, and impenetrable darkness. In your 21st century world, complete darkness is practically impossible to find. Even in rural areas, there is always some ambient light. The distant glow of a city, street lights along the roads, the soft luminescence of electronic devices indoors, starlight amplified by light pollution reflected in the atmosphere. Here, when the sun has set and the moon has not yet risen, darkness is a tangible entity, almost a physical element that swallows the world. It is a darkness so deep that you cannot see your own hand inches from your face. It is a darkness that transforms the familiar outlines of the village into a disorienting labyrinth. It is a darkness that awakens primal fears buried deep in the human subconscious. Inside your single-room house, the only light comes from the central hearth, or, in wealthier homes, from tallow candles or oil lamps. These light sources are precarious, expensive, and dangerous. A good quality candle could cost the equivalent of a full day's wages. Oil for lamps is similarly expensive. As a result, most families ration these items, lighting them only when absolutely necessary and for the shortest possible time. The light produced by these sources is weak and flickering. A tallow candle emits approximately 1/100th of the light of a modern 60-watt incandescent bulb. It sways and dances with every draft, creating shifting shadows that seem alive. The range of the light is small, perhaps illuminating a radius of a few feet, leaving corners and distant areas in gloom. The fire in the hearth provides more light, but it is also inconsistent, changing in intensity as the wood burns unevenly. The smoke that does not escape properly through the hole in the roof fills the air, irritating eyes and lungs, and further obscuring the limited vision. In this poor light, nighttime activities are severely restricted. Tasks that require visual precision, such as sewing, reading, for the few who can read, or detailed manual work, are extremely difficult or impossible after sunset. Instead, the hours of darkness are filled with tasks that can be performed by touch or with minimal vision: spinning wool, chopping wood, talking, telling stories, rocking children to sleep. The rhythm of medieval life is synchronized with the sun in a way that modern society, with its artificial lighting, has long forgotten. People generally go to bed much earlier than you are used to, perhaps an hour or two after sunset, especially in winter when the nights are long. They also wake at dawn, or even before, maximizing the available hours of sunlight. Medieval sleep is different from yours. You are used to a consolidated block of 8 hours, more or less, of uninterrupted sleep. Historical evidence suggests that many pre-industrial people practiced what historians call biphasic sleep, two distinct periods of sleep separated by 1 or 2 hours of wakefulness in the middle of the night. During this nocturnal wakefulness, people prayed, meditated, talked quietly with bedfellows, or simply contemplated the darkness. The very act of sleeping is radically different from your modern routine. There is no brushing your teeth with minty toothpaste, no hot, relaxing shower, no reading under a convenient bedside lamp, no last check of social media. Instead, you simply remove some of your outer layers. Many people sleep in the same clothes they wear during the day or in a simple nightshirt. Say your nightly prayers and lie down on the same pile of straw where you woke up this morning. You do not sleep alone. Privacy in sleep is a modern luxury. The entire family, parents, children, perhaps grandparents, sometimes even servants or apprentices, shares the same sleeping space, often the same bed, which is more a designated area on the floor or a raised platform than an individual piece of furniture. In wealthier homes, there might be curtains for some visual separation, but acoustic privacy is practically non-existent. The mattress, as mentioned before, has nothing to do with modern ergonomic comfort. It is a rough cloth sack stuffed with straw, hay, dried leaves, or for the more fortunate, wool or feathers. Without regular replacement, this filling compacts, rots, and becomes a haven for insects and other parasites. The pillow, if it exists, is equally primitive. Perhaps a partially cloth-wrapped block of wood or another small sack of straw. Blankets are scarce, perhaps a heavy woolen blanket shared among several family members. On cold nights, people sleep fully dressed, sometimes including hats to keep their heads warm. Pets may be invited into the sleeping space for their body heat. Cats, dogs, even larger animals like pigs on extremely cold occasions. Thermal comfort is almost impossible to maintain. In winter, even with the hearth fire, the interior of a medieval peasant's house becomes painfully cold. The smoke that doesn't escape properly through the roof makes the indoor air irritating to lungs and eyes. In summer, the heat can be suffocating, especially on the upper floors of two-story houses where hot air accumulates. Opening windows for ventilation, when they exist and are not just openings covered with cloth or wood, attracts insects, particularly near swamps or stagnant water where mosquitoes proliferate. The sounds of the night are drastically different from your modern environment. There is no constant hum of a refrigerator, no distant murmur of traffic, no occasional noise of an elevator in the building. Instead, you hear the crackling of the dying fire, the snores and breathing of your bedfellows, the occasional cry of a child, the movement of animals in the attached stable, the distant howl of wolves, the hoot of owls, the incessant buzzing of insects during the warm months. When nature calls at night, there is no well-lit bathroom a few steps away. You must find your way in the dark to the waste bucket in the corner of the house, or if you prefer more privacy and safety, risk a nighttime walk to the outdoor latrine. Many people simply use chamber pots stored under the bed, another contributor to the loaded olfactory environment of the sleeping space. The darkness outside is the domain of real and imagined dangers. Wolves and other predators are more active at night. Thieves and wrongdoers take advantage of the cover of darkness. In the medieval mind, the night also belongs to supernatural beings, ghosts, demons, mischievous fairies, werewolves, vampires, and countless other folkloric creatures that populate the popular imagination. These beliefs are not mere superstitions for the people living in this era. They are accepted realities that shape behaviors and decisions. Protective amulets hang over beds and doorways. Specific prayers against nocturnal dangers are recited before sleep. Certain herbs known for their supposed protective properties are scattered on the floor or placed in small sachets under pillows. Sleep is often disturbed. Besides the hardness of the bed, there is the discomfort caused by fleas, lice, and other parasites that inhabit the bedding materials. Chronic respiratory diseases resulting from years of breathing indoor smoke and dust cause nocturnal coughing. Diets deficient in essential nutrients lead to muscle cramps that wake people up. The stress of constant worries about basic survival generates anxiety that interferes with deep sleep. Medieval dreams are populated by images and concerns specific to this time and place. People dream of saints and demons, of famines and feasts, of the return of deceased loved ones, of divine judgment and the afterlife. Vivid dreams are often interpreted as omens or messages from the beyond, discussed seriously in the light of day, sometimes even taken to religious experts for interpretation. And yet, despite all these difficulties, sleep comes perhaps more easily than it would for you, a modern person transported to this era. The exhaustive physical labor of the day ensures that despite the discomfort, the worn-out body eventually succumbs to the necessary sleep to face another equally challenging day. As you lie in the darkness, listening to unfamiliar sounds and smelling the strange aromas of this ancient world, you might find a moment of connection with the countless generations who lived and slept like this. Humanity has spent much more of its history in these natural cycles of light and darkness than in the artificially lit and temperature-controlled environment you are accustomed to. There is a comforting antiquity in this rhythm, a link to the deep past of our species. Finally, sleep comes, lulled by the absolute exhaustion that only a full day of physical work and constant stimuli can produce. You sleep, not the light, interrupted sleep of modern man with his restless mind, but the deep sleep of those whose bodies have been used to their full capacity. And when you wake up, it all begins again. Another day of struggle, another day of survival, another day in the life of an ordinary medieval peasant, a life that most modern people would not endure for 24 hours. The next morning, as you rise to face another day of arduous work, you might reflect on something that underlies all the differences you have encountered. The fundamental gulf in access to knowledge and education between your modern world and this medieval one. In your 21st century life, you carry in your pocket a device that provides instant access to almost all of accumulated human knowledge. Universal literacy is a basic expectation. Formal education is mandatory for children, and even the average adult possesses a rudimentary understanding of basic scientific principles. Global geography, world history, and functional mathematics. In the medieval world you have woken up in, knowledge is a scarce resource, carefully controlled and distributed in an extremely unequal manner. Literacy is a rare privilege. For the common peasant, the ability to read and write is not only unnecessary for daily life, it is seen as an almost magical skill possessed only by the clergy, nobles, successful merchants, and some urban artisans. Estimates vary, but probably less than 10% of the medieval population is literate, with even lower rates among peasants and women. Formal schools exist mainly in cities and are associated with cathedrals or monasteries. They primarily train future clergy or administrators. For the vast majority of peasant children, there's no formal education of any kind. Instead, they learn by observation and gradual participation in adult work, a practical apprenticeship that begins at 4 or 5 years of age. The knowledge available to a typical peasant comes from oral sources. Stories told around the fire, sermons heard in church, songs passed down through generations, proverbs that encapsulate centuries of practical wisdom. This oral tradition is rich and complex, but limited in scope and subject to the distortions of human memory and reinterpretation over time. Even practical knowledge is restricted by geographical isolation. A peasant might spend their entire life without traveling more than 20 or 30 kilometers from their birthplace. Agricultural, artisanal, and medical techniques are those passed down by local generations with few opportunities to exchange ideas or innovations from distant regions. The medieval worldview is fundamentally shaped by religion. The Catholic Church is the great intellectual unifier, providing an explanatory framework for everything from natural phenomena to historical events and human behavior. Without access to scientific explanations, natural events are interpreted through the lens of divine or demonic intervention. Storms, droughts, eclipses, diseases, all are seen as manifestations of God's will or attacks by evil forces. The religious calendar structures the knowledge of time. People do not think in terms of October the 15th, but rather the third day after the Feast of St. Francis or 2 weeks before Lent. The year is marked not by numbered months, but by religious festivals and agricultural milestones. Daily time is measured by the church bells and the position of the sun, not by precise clocks. Geography for most people is extremely limited. Maps are rare, inaccurate, and often mix real geography with mythological or religious elements. For the average peasant, knowledge of the world extends perhaps to the nearest market town or the regional monastery. Foreign lands are known only through stories told by pilgrims or itinerant merchants, stories that frequently mix fact and fantasy in proportions impossible to separate without other points of reference. Medical knowledge, as previously discussed, is a mixture of practical observation, tradition, superstition, and humoral theory derived from ancient texts. Without microscopes to see pathogens, without knowledge of blood circulation or organ function, without an understanding of genetics or biochemistry, diseases are explained by humoral imbalances, miasmas, noxious vapors, divine punishment, or witchcraft. Medieval astronomy recognizes the patterns of celestial movements through centuries of careful observation, but interprets these movements within a geocentric model of the universe, with the Earth stationary at the center and all celestial bodies revolving around it in crystalline spheres. Comets and meteors are seen as omens, not understandable natural phenomena. The mathematics available to common people is rudimentary and practical, sufficient for basic commercial transactions, but little beyond that. Most people do not understand negative numbers or complex fractions. Calculations are made using abacuses, counting boards, or simply by manipulating physical objects to represent quantities. History for medieval people is a mixture of documented facts, legends, and religious narratives. The distinction between myth and recorded history is often blurred. Real historical figures can be mythologized, while legendary characters are treated as historical. Chronology is approximate and compressed or expanded in ways that modern standards would consider grossly inaccurate. This limited access to knowledge fundamentally shapes the way you, transported from the 21st century, and a native inhabitant of the 14th century experience the same reality. Where you see natural causes, they see divine intervention. Where you recognize coincidence, they perceive meaning and omens. Where you seek evidence-based explanations, they resort to authority and tradition. The subjective experience of the world is profoundly altered by this different substrate of knowledge. A storm is not just an understandable meteorological event, it is an act of God that requires moral interpretation. A disease is not just the action of identifiable pathogens, it is a mysterious bodily imbalance that may have both spiritual and physical causes. A foreigner is not just someone from another culture. They are an almost alien being whose customs and beliefs may be dangerous or contaminating. For the medieval mind, the world is simultaneously smaller in scope, geographically limited to what can be experienced personally, and more mysterious in nature, filled with forces and beings beyond human comprehension. It is a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural is thin or non-existent, where magical and scientific explanations coexist comfortably, where the universe is imbued with moral purpose and meaning in every aspect. This is not just a world with less knowledge. It is a world with a fundamentally different epistemology, a different way of determining what counts as knowledge and how that knowledge is validated and transmitted. Systematic experimentation, peer review, independent verification, methodological skepticism, the pillars of the modern scientific method, are largely absent as intellectual tools. In their place is a reliance on authority, whether traditional, religious, or aristocratic. The persistence of time-tested practices, even if objectively ineffective, the interpretation of signs and omens, and a willingness to accept multiple contradictory explanations for the same phenomenon without feeling the need to reconcile them. For you, a person of the 21st century accustomed to consistent and verifiable explanations. Evidence-based medicine, reliable technology, and instant access to information, this medieval world is not just physically uncomfortable, it is intellectually disorienting. The conceptual tools you automatically use to navigate reality are largely absent or radically different. And yet this world produced magnificent cathedrals, complex philosophical systems, enduring literature, and laid the groundwork for many of the institutions and ideas that would eventually lead to your own modern world. The medieval mind, operating with a different set of conceptual tools and a more limited knowledge base, still achieved moments of inspiration and profound understanding that resonate through the centuries. As you face another day of physical labor, carrying water from a distant well or guiding oxen through a muddy field, you might reflect on this disparity. My body may not be prepared for the physical demands of medieval life, but my mind is also not prepared for the epistemological limitations of this older, more mysterious, and in many ways, more enchanted world. As the morning sun climbs higher in the sky, your stomach rumbles again. The intense physical labor burns calories quickly, and you feel a genuine hunger, not the casual hunger of modern life that can be easily ignored or postponed, but a primitive and urgent need for sustenance. The midday meal of a medieval peasant is something simple and quick, often consumed directly at the worksite without interrupting the flow of daily tasks. There is no set lunch hour, no restaurants or cafes, no thermal bags filled with varied options. Instead, you take from a small cloth sack or pouch a piece of dark rye bread, the same you had for breakfast. Alongside it, there might be a piece of hard cheese, a raw onion, or some pickled vegetables. On especially good days, there might be a piece of salted bacon or a thin slice of dried meat. A ceramic bottle or leather canteen contains beer diluted with water, or, if you are near a natural spring, just fresh water. This basic meal is consumed quickly, sitting in the shade of a tree or on the edge of the field, often without completely stopping work. There are no utensils. You eat with your calloused, dirt-stained hands. There are no napkins, only the sleeve of your tunic to wipe your mouth if necessary. The food itself would be almost unrecognizable to your modern palate, accustomed to perfectly seasoned dishes, consistent textures, and complex flavors. The bread is dense and heavy, nothing like the soft, fluffy loaves from modern supermarkets. It is often slightly sour due to natural fermentation and may contain small stones from the milling process or insect fragments mixed into the flour. The cheese has a strong, pungent flavor, the result of months of aging without refrigeration. Without modern chemical preservatives, medieval cheesemakers relied on high salt content and aging techniques that produced intense flavors that many modern palates would find excessive or even unpleasant. Vegetables are limited to what is in season and can be grown locally. There are no tomatoes, potatoes, corn, bell peppers, or any other New World crops that we now consider staples in European cuisine. Instead, turnips, carrots, paler and smaller than modern varieties, peas, fava beans, lentils, onions, garlic, and cabbage, and other hardy vegetables that grow well in temperate climates and can be stored for long periods. Fruits, when available, are smaller, more acidic and full of seeds than their modern equivalents, the result of centuries of artificial selection. Medieval apples would be smaller and more bitter than today's crisp varieties. Pears would be harder and grainier. Wild berries, blackberries, raspberries, wild strawberries were seasonal and precious. Meat is a luxury for many peasants, consumed regularly only by the most prosperous or on special occasions. When available, it is often salted, smoked, or dried for preservation, resulting in tough textures and extremely salty flavors. Fresh cuts are rare and reserved for feasts, celebrations, or the tables of the nobles. Peasants typically eat the less desirable parts of animals, organs, feet, heads, while the best cuts go to those higher in the social hierarchy. Animal fat, lard, bacon, butter is highly valued for both its flavor and its caloric content. In a world where daily energy expenditure is immense and hunger always looms, high-calorie foods are exactly what the body needs, not something to be avoided as in modern health-conscious diets. The spices common in your modern kitchen, black pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, are expensive luxuries imported from distant lands, rarely seen on peasant tables. Instead, flavors come from local herbs, parsley, sage, thyme, rosemary, dill, mint, garlic. Salt is the main seasoning, valuable enough to be used sparingly despite being essential for food preservation. Refined sugar is practically unknown to the common people. Honey is the main sweetener, but it is expensive and used sparingly. Most peasants simply get used to naturally bitter or sour flavors without sweeteners. Alcoholic beverages, beer, mead, cider, and in producing regions, wine, are important not only as intoxicants, but as essential sources of nutrition and safe hydration. Medieval beer is carbonated and cloudier than modern varieties, often with a lower alcohol content, a more malty flavor, and a thicker consistency. It is consumed at every meal by men, women, and even children, providing calories, B vitamins, and most importantly, safer hydration than untreated water. Dinner, the evening meal after the day's work, might be the only hot meal of the day for many. It is usually a soup or stew, a single pot where the available ingredients are cooked together to maximize flavor and simplify preparation. Roughly chopped vegetables, grains, barley, oats, occasionally wheat, herbs, and perhaps a bone with a little meat for flavor, all boiled together in a cauldron suspended over the open fire. This stew might be eaten for days, with new ingredients added as available, and the pot is rarely emptied completely or cleaned. The result is a complex flavor that evolves over time, but also a considerable risk of bacterial contamination by modern standards. Bread remains the indispensable staple food, consumed in quantities that would seem excessive by modern measures. An adult worker could easily eat a kilogram or more of bread per day, providing the necessary caloric base to sustain intense physical labor. For a medieval peasant, the primary function of food is sustenance, calories, and nutrition to fuel work, not for sensory experience or cultural expression. Variety is limited to what can be grown locally and stored effectively without refrigeration. Seasonality dictates availability, with periods of relative abundance after the harvest giving way to times of scarcity as stocks diminish, especially in the hunger months of late winter and early spring, when the previous year's reserves run out and the new harvest is not yet ready. For you, a person of the 21st century, accustomed to an almost infinite variety of food options available year-round, the monotony of the medieval diet would perhaps be one of the most difficult aspects to endure long-term. The same limited rotation of flavors, textures, and ingredients day after day, week after week, with few variations beyond seasonal availability, would quickly become oppressively tedious for a modern palate accustomed to constant diversity. Moreover, the very presentation of the food would be strange to modern eyes. There are no individual plates, often not even separate dishes for different foods. A flat piece of stale bread called a trencher often serves as a plate, absorbing sauces and juices before being eaten or, if too hard to be palatable, given to animals or the poor. The fork is practically unknown. People eat with spoons. Knives they carry with them, and primarily with their fingers. Table manners focus on sharing fairly, not wasting anything, and showing respect for food as a gift from God that should not be taken for granted. Even the kitchen utensils are drastically different. There are no stoves with controlled temperatures, ovens with precise settings, food processors, or blenders. Food is prepared in or over an open fire, requiring constant attention and manual adjustment. Temperature is judged by experience and touch, not by thermometers. Cooking times are estimated by the sun or by simple devices like hourglasses, not by precise timers. Refrigeration is practically non-existent beyond cool cellars or deep wells where perishables might be stored briefly, or mountainous areas where snow and ice might occasionally be used for short-term preservation. Preservation relies mainly on techniques like salting, smoking, fermentation, drying, or comfit in fat. Food safety is a radically different concept. Without an understanding of germs or microscopic contamination, people judge the safety of food primarily by obvious sensory characteristics: smell, appearance, taste. The result is that food poisoning is a common occurrence, especially in times of scarcity when people are forced to eat food they would normally reject. Food waste is minimized to a degree that would surprise modern sensibilities. Practically every part of the animal is used, from the meat and the organs, blood, marrow, skins, and bones. Leftovers go to the animals or become compost. Stale bread is softened in liquids or made into puddings and porridges. Even the water used to wash utensils might be reused to water plants or given to animals. Fasting and abstinence prescribed by the Church add another layer of restriction to the already limited medieval diet. During Lent, the 40 days before Easter, and many other dates on the religious calendar, meat, dairy, and sometimes eggs are forbidden. These periods can total a third of the year or more. For the rich, these fasts mean elaborate meals with fish and seafood. For the poor, they mean even greater restrictions on an already insufficient diet. For the medieval peasant, food is never something taken for granted. Every meal is the product of hard work, whether in agriculture, gathering, hunting, or preservation. Every bite represents a significant investment of energy, time, and resources. Food is treated with a level of respect and gratitude rarely seen in the culture of abundance and waste that characterizes much of the modern developed world. If you survived for months or years in this world, your palate would gradually adjust. Flavors that initially seemed strong, sour, or strange would become normal. The simplicity of the peasant diet would reveal its own subtle complexities. You would learn to appreciate the natural sweetness of a fresh carrot after a long winter of eating stored vegetables, or the extraordinary flavor of wild berries at the height of summer. But for a time traveler newly arrived from the future, the experience of medieval food would be a cultural shock as profound as any other aspect of this distant society. After a few days of trying to understand medieval life, you begin to realize how the people around you live in a state of constant preparation. While summer still reigns, there is a quiet urgency in every task. Why is everyone so anxious when the weather is pleasant, you wonder? It is then that you realize something fundamental about medieval life. Each season is a distinct struggle, a different predator lurking. Summer, which for you represents vacation and fun, is for them a race against time. The long days do not mean more hours of leisure, but more hours of exhausting work under the scorching sun. Without sunscreen, proper hats, or sunglasses, the peasant's skin is permanently tanned, wrinkled, and prematurely aged. Sweat flows continuously, soaking the rough woolen clothes that cannot be changed frequently. The constant perspiration, combined with the lack of deodorant and regular baths, creates a pungent body odor that permeates the entire community. The heat brings another invisible enemy, dehydration. There are no bottles of purified water or sports drinks with electrolytes. Thirst is quenched with water from wells, springs, or streams, often contaminated with parasites and bacteria. On particularly hot days, it is not uncommon for workers to faint in the fields, sometimes fatally, without the modern understanding of heat stroke or exhaustion. Insects thrive in the summer heat. Clouds of mosquitoes attack at dusk, with no repellent to keep them at bay. Flies land indiscriminately on food, open wounds, and waste, spreading diseases without anyone understanding the mechanism of contamination. Fleas, ticks, and lice multiply in clothes, hair, and straw beds, causing constant itching and transmitting diseases like typhus and plague. Summer also brings drought. Weeks without rain turn the fields to dust and dangerously lower the water levels in the wells. The crops wither, the animals weaken, and the threat of winter famine grows with each rainless day. There are no modern irrigation systems, no weather forecast to plan ahead, only desperate prayers and ancient rituals in the hope of attracting the saving rain. But when autumn arrives, the anxiety reaches new heights. The harvest must be completed before the first frosts, every precious grain properly stored, or famine becomes inevitable in the following months. All members of the community are mobilized, from children to the elderly. Entire days are spent cutting grain with sickles, no mechanical harvesters, tying sheaves, carrying them to the threshing floor, separating the grains from the straw using purely manual methods, and then storing them in barns, vulnerable to rats, moisture, and mold. Autumn is also when the animals that cannot be fed during the winter are slaughtered. The air fills with the smell of blood as pigs, sheep, and cattle are transformed into meat that must be preserved immediately. Without refrigeration, the preservation methods, salting, smoking, drying, are laborious and imperfect. The preserved meat is extremely salty, often rancid, and a perfect breeding ground for dangerous bacteria when the process fails. When winter finally arrives, it reveals a whole new dimension of suffering. The cold is a constant predator, seeking any gap in your defenses. Your medieval clothes, even in several layers, are inadequate against the biting wind. There is no insulation in the walls of your hut, only mud, wood, and straw that allow drafts of icy air to infiltrate through countless cracks. At night, the cold is particularly cruel. Your bed has no electric blankets, no central heating program to maintain a stable temperature. Only the heat of a fire that inevitably dies out during the night, making dawn a daily shock. You often wake up shivering violently with numb fingers and toes, your breath forming clouds inside your own home. The darkness of winter is oppressive. The days are brutally short, with perhaps 8 hours of weak light between sunrise and sunset. In the worst times, without electric lighting, the long nights are filled with an almost total darkness, relieved only by the flickering glow of a fire, or for the luckier ones, by an occasional tallow candle that emits more smoke than light. The monotony of the winter diet wears down the body and mind. Fresh vegetables disappear completely, replaced by stored roots that become increasingly withered and sprouted. Scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency that you know only from history books, is a real threat. Gums bleed, wounds do not heal, and weakness creeps stealthily into your nutrient-deprived body. Water freezes regularly. Wells and streams become covered with ice, requiring extra work to break the solid surface just to get the liquid essential for life. Washing becomes even rarer, as the idea of ice-cold water touching already dry and chapped skin is almost unbearable. The smell inside the houses, with people wearing the same clothes for months without baths and living in extreme proximity to animals brought inside for survival, becomes indescribably pungent. Respiratory diseases sweep through communities during the winter. Pneumonia is not just a treatable condition with antibiotics. It is a feared killer that takes the very young and the elderly. Constant coughs echo through the huts, mixing with the crackling of the fire. Fever, pain, congestion, all endured without effective medicines, humidifiers, or modern treatments to alleviate the suffering. Winter also brings hunger. Even with careful planning, supplies often dwindle dangerously before spring. Rations are reduced, stomachs never completely full. The so-called hunger months, usually from February to April, are an annual reality for many communities. You can see the change in the faces around you, thinner with distant gazes, conserving energy, moving more slowly. Spring finally brings relief from the deadly cold, but presents its own challenges. The thaw turns the paths into almost impassable pools of mud. Planting must begin immediately, but with people weakened by the deficient winter diet. Precious seeds, carefully saved from the last harvest, must be entrusted to the soil with prayers that they will germinate, knowing that any failure means famine in the next winter. It is a relentless cycle with no escape. Each season brings its own terrors and demands without the comfort of modern technologies to soften the extremes. There are no thermostats to adjust, no supermarkets to buy out-of-season fruit, no medicines to treat seasonal illnesses, no high-tech clothing designed for specific climates. As you watch the peasants constantly planning for the next season while struggling to survive the current one, you understand something profound about the medieval mindset. There is no isolated present, only a continuous battle against the cycles of nature. Each day lived is not just a victory, but a necessary investment in future survival. And you, with your body accustomed to modern controlled comfort, realize that you would not last a single full cycle of the seasons. Your unacclimatized body, lacking the resistance built over a lifetime of exposure, would quickly succumb to the relentless assault of the medieval climate. The sound wakes you before dawn, a bell ringing frantically. Not the usual methodical call to mass, but an urgent, irregular toll that can only mean danger. When you step out of the hut along with other sleepy villagers, the morning air is cut by distant screams and an orange glow on the horizon. The neighboring village, just a few kilometers away, is on fire. War, an abstract concept you know mainly from news reports and history books, is, in the Middle Ages, a visceral and devastating presence that can literally arrive at your doorstep at any moment. There is no distant front line, no demilitarized zone protecting civilians. When war comes, it swallows everything. Panic spreads quickly through the community. Some villagers are already running for the forest, carrying only what they can. Others are quickly burying small treasures, a few coins, perhaps a family piece of silver, in the hope of finding them again if they survive. Mothers wrap babies in cloths, calming their cries with their breasts or pieces of cloth soaked in diluted mead. There is no time for careful deliberation or orderly evacuations. You realize you do not even know who is attacking or why. Medieval wars are rarely explained to common peasants. You are just a pawn on a chessboard whose players you will never meet. It could be a dispute between your feudal lord and a neighboring lord. It could be a larger campaign between kingdoms. It could just be a band of unemployed mercenaries who, without pay, resort to looting to survive. In your modern life, you are accustomed to professional armies with clear uniforms, rules of engagement, and at least a pretense of protecting civilians. Here, such concepts are practically non-existent. The approaching soldiers may be trained knights, but they are more likely a mix of poorly trained mercenaries, peasants forcibly recruited from other regions, and opportunists attracted by the prospect of plunder. When they finally reach your village hours later, the brutality of medieval warfare hits you with full force. There are no Geneva Conventions, no international media monitoring, no war crimes tribunals. There are only armed men, often hungry and poorly paid, with implicit or explicit permission to take what they want from enemy populations. The scenes that unfold before you are nightmarish. Barns are set on fire, destroying in minutes the work of months that would have ensured the community's survival in the coming winter. Animals are slaughtered on the spot or taken away, eliminating both immediate food and future means of subsistence. Houses are looted. Any item of value, even by the standards of the poor, is stolen. The violence against people is even more disturbing. Men who resist are killed without hesitation, often in ways designed to terrorize others. Women are raped, sometimes in front of their families. Even children are not spared from violence, either directly or as witnesses to atrocities against their loved ones. There are no NGOs to document abuses, no peacekeeping forces to intervene, no safe havens for refugees. The most shocking fact to your modern sensibility is how all of this is seen as an expected, almost normal part of the natural order. Medieval peasants do not expect war to be civilized or for soldiers to respect their rights. Such concepts simply do not exist. War is understood as a catastrophe, similar to a natural disaster, something to be endured and survived, not something to be protested or for which to seek justice. Even if you escape the initial attack, fleeing into the forest as many villagers have done, the dangers only transform. The medieval forest is not a safe national park. It is a wild place full of its own dangers. Without proper equipment, survival training, or detailed knowledge of the local terrain, your chances as a modern person are especially precarious. After the invaders leave, the survivors face an almost impossible struggle. They return to burned houses, empty barns, possibly contaminated wells. There is no FEMA, Red Cross, or post-war reconstruction programs, no insurance, emergency loans, or humanitarian aid. Only empty hands, broken hearts, and the inexorably approaching winter. Disease often follows war like relentless shadows. Poorly buried bodies contaminate water sources. Malnutrition weakens the immune system. Untreated wounds become infected. And displaced populations carry and transmit pathogens to new areas. Without antibiotics, vaccines, or even the basic germ theory, post-conflict epidemics often kill more than the initial violence. The psychological aspect of trauma is perhaps the most alien to your modern mind. There are no trauma counselors, no therapy for PTSD, not even a vocabulary to process what has been experienced. Survivors carry their horrors in silence, incorporating them into their worldview as further proof that life is brutally difficult and often short. Children who witness atrocities do not receive psychological intervention. They are simply expected to move on, carrying invisible scars for the rest of their lives. For those in positions of power, war is often a calculated enterprise, a way to expand territory, resolve dynastic disputes, or simply demonstrate power. For the common peasants, it is just senseless destruction, another face of the endless struggle for survival. And this is without even considering large-scale wars, the Crusades, the 100 Years' War, countless dynastic conflicts. These prolonged wars could mean generations living under the constant threat of violence. Some regions were so frequently contested that they barely knew peace for centuries. As you watch the survivors begin the painful task of rebuilding, gathering charred wood that might still be useful, searching for hidden tools that escape the looting, comforting traumatized children, you understand one more reason why you would not survive in this world. Your expectation of personal safety, your fundamental belief that violence is the exception and not the rule, your assumption that there are systems to protect the innocent, all of this would be shattered in a single day of medieval warfare. Violence here is not a crime to be punished, but simply an aspect of existence to be endured like the weather or famine. And you, a product of a society that, despite its flaws, has built layers of protection between its citizens and naked brutality, are completely unprepared for this fundamental aspect of medieval reality. As the village slowly recovers from the attack, you notice something surprising. Despite the devastation, the loss of loved ones, and the destruction of vital resources, one of the first structures the survivors begin to rebuild is not the barn or the mill, but the small wooden chapel in the center of the community. This priority reveals something fundamental about the medieval mind that your modern sensibility initially struggles to comprehend. For these people, religion is not a personal choice or a weekend activity. It is the very foundation of reality, the explanation for everything from the birth of a baby to the destruction wrought by war. The medieval world is, above all, an enchanted world, not in the romantic, fairy tale sense of modern fantasy, but in the literal sense of being permeated by active and present supernatural forces. God, angels, demons, saints, spirits. These are not theological abstractions or metaphors, but real entities constantly intervening in human affairs. The medieval understanding of the cosmos is radically different from your modern scientific view. The physical heavens above, sun, moon, stars, planets, are understood as part of a divinely ordered universe where celestial spheres revolve around the earth, moved by angels. Comets, eclipses, and auroras are not natural phenomena with scientific explanations, but divine signs intended to convey specific messages to humanity. The Church dominates not only spiritual life, but also marks time. Without widely available mechanical clocks, the church bells divide the day into periods of prayer: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. The year is structured not around secular holidays or vacation seasons, but around the liturgical calendar: Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter, Pentecost, and countless saints' days. This marking of time has immediate practical consequences. During Lent, for example, meat, eggs, and dairy are forbidden, a restriction that profoundly affects the already monotonous medieval diet. Specific holy days determine when certain agricultural activities should begin or end. Pilgrimages to local or regional shrines can take workers from the fields at critical times of the agricultural year. Perhaps the most disorienting aspect for your modern mind is the complete interpenetration of the natural and the supernatural. Diseases are not caused only by physical imbalances, but by sins, curses, or demonic influence. Crops do not fail only due to weather conditions, but because God is punishing the community for some transgression. Birth defects are not explained by genetics, but are seen as omens or consequences of the parent's sins. Remedies and cures equally mix natural and supernatural elements. An herbal infusion for a fever might be prepared during a specific lunar phase while reciting particular prayers. A blessed amulet might be as important for treatment as any medicine. Relics of saints, Fragments of bone, cloth, or objects associated with holy figures are considered to possess tangible healing powers. The boundary between official religion and popular superstition is often blurred. Although the Church formally disapproves of certain pagan practices, in reality, many pre-Christian traditions persist, disguised in Christian terminology. Sacred wells, once dedicated to pagan deities, are now associated with saints. Ancient seasonal festivals are absorbed as celebrations of Christian saints. The fear of the supernatural is constant and visceral. The devil is not a distant metaphor, but an active predator seeking souls. Demons can possess people, animals, or places. Witches, people supposedly allied with demonic forces, pose terrifying threats to the community. A ruined harvest, sick livestock, or an unexplained illness can quickly lead to accusations of witchcraft, with potentially fatal consequences for the accused. Angels and saints offer protection against these evil forces, but this protection must be constantly cultivated through prayers, offerings, and pious behavior. Images of patron saints are displayed in homes and workshops. Blessed medals are worn as protection, and specific prayers are recited at particular moments of danger. The concept of coincidence hardly exists in the medieval mind. Seemingly random events are interpreted as significant, charged with divine or demonic purpose. A crow landing on a roof, milk souring inexplicably, a child born with an unusual birthmark. All can be interpreted as omens or signs to be decoded. The dead remain much more present in daily consciousness than in your modern society. Deceased souls are actively remembered and prayed for, not just for the emotional comfort of the living, but because such prayers are considered literally helpful to souls in purgatory. Ghosts are not Halloween entertainment, but real visitors from the beyond, who may bring warnings, request prayers, or haunt the living to resolve unrepented sins. This belief system may seem limiting to your modern mentality, but it also offers something that your secular society often lacks: a coherent universe where everything has meaning. Nothing is truly random or purposeless. Suffering, however terrible, can be understood within a larger cosmic narrative of sin, redemption, and eternal salvation. For the medieval peasant, the certainty that there is a divine plan, that good deeds will eventually be rewarded, if not in this life, then in the next, and that evil will ultimately be punished, provides a framework for enduring the countless hardships of life. The promise of heaven is not a theological abstraction, but a concrete hope, sustaining them through famine, disease, and loss. At the same time, the fear of damnation is equally tangible. Hell is not a metaphorical concept, but a literal and terrifying fate awaiting sinners. Demons are not psychological symbols, but real torturers eager to drag souls to eternal torment. This constant fear shapes behaviors and choices in ways that would be almost incomprehensible to your modern sensibility. The Church dominates every stage of life, from baptism, considered essential to prevent unbaptized babies from remaining forever in limbo, to the funeral rites necessary to ensure the soul departs properly. Every important transition is overseen by religious authorities. Marriages, to be valid, require the Church's blessing. Even planting and harvesting dates are often determined by religious festivals. For people raised in modern, secular societies, this complete fusion of religion with every aspect of life might seem suffocating. Your expectation of spiritual privacy, the freedom to question or even the right to doubt, would be completely alien to the medieval mentality. Atheism, as you know it, would be almost inconceivable. not just heretical, but literally incomprehensible to the medieval mind. As a modern person temporarily transported to this world, you would constantly betray yourself through your lack of religious knowledge and secular reflexes. You would not automatically know when to kneel, which prayers to recite when, which saints to invoke for specific protections. These failures would not be seen merely as social gaffes, but as potentially dangerous to the entire community, possibly inviting divine wrath. As you watch the villagers gather for a mass of thanksgiving for the survivors, singing Latin hymns that they do not fully understand but know by heart from childhood, you realize yet another dimension of your unsuitability for this world. It is not just your body, unprepared for physical labor, or your lack of practical skills. It is your modern mind, trained to seek natural explanations, value skepticism, and critical analysis, that would make you not just a stranger, but potentially a danger to the medieval community. The priest, speaking about how the attack was a trial sent by God to test the community's faith, offers a comfort that would be toxic to your modern sensibility, but is genuinely consoling to his listeners. In rebuilding the chapel before even securing adequate food, you see not an irrational inversion of priorities, but an expression of a worldview where spiritual protection is as essential to survival as bread and shelter. In your world, you might seek comfort in scientific explanations, rational understanding, and technological solutions. Here, these concepts not only do not exist, but would be viewed with deep suspicion. And as you silently question the logic of thanking God for the survivors of a tragedy that he supposedly allowed, the villagers around you find genuine solace in their unwavering faith. This epistemological abyss, this fundamental difference in how knowledge and truth are understood and validated, is perhaps the final blow to your chances of survival. Your body might, over time, adapt to the physical work. Your hands might eventually acquire the necessary skills, but your modern mind, shaped by centuries of enlightenment, scientific rationalism, and secularization, would remain fundamentally alien to the enchanted world of the Middle Ages. The next day, as the rebuilding of the village continues, you join a group of peasants working to repair a damaged roof. Someone places a medieval hammer in your hands, and you immediately notice another fundamental difference between your world and this one: the nature of the tools and technology around you. The hammer in your hands barely deserves the name by modern standards. It is heavy, poorly balanced, with an irregular hand-forged iron head and a handle not ergonomically designed. After just a few minutes of trying to nail boards in place, your hands are already blistered, and your muscles protest against the inefficient effort required for each blow. This simple experience illustrates a broader truth about medieval life. The available tools and technologies are not just older, less efficient versions of modern ones. They are fundamentally different in design, effectiveness, and accessibility, making every task immensely more difficult than its modern equivalent. Consider the most fundamental technology of medieval society, the plow. In your time, mechanized agriculture with GPS-guided tractors can cultivate hundreds of hectares with millimeter precision. Here, the state-of-the-art is the heavy plow pulled by oxen, requiring multiple animals and often several men to operate effectively. The land is not plowed in perfect rows, but in irregular furrows that maximize the available animal strength rather than planting efficiency. The oxen pulling these plows are not the carefully bred races of your time, optimized for strength or endurance. They are smaller animals, more susceptible to disease, and less efficient, consuming precious resources even when not working. There are no veterinarians with antibiotics to treat infections, nor nutritional supplements to maximize their performance. When a work animal gets sick or dies, the loss to the community is devastating. Even the most basic hand tools you would take for granted are luxuries are completely absent here. Screwdrivers do not exist as you know them. Nails are individually hand-forged by a blacksmith, making them expensive and valuable enough to be salvaged from old structures and reused. Screws with standardized threads are unknown. Bubble levels to ensure perfectly horizontal surfaces have not been invented. Inconsistency is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of medieval technology. Without standardized production, every tool is slightly different. One hammer might have a significantly different weight and balance from another, requiring constant adjustment of technique. Parts are not interchangeable. Repairs often require improvised solutions with available materials, not precise replacement components. Tool maintenance is constant work. Untreated metals rust quickly, wood cracks and warps with climate changes, and moving parts wear down without effective lubricants. Much of the limited free time is spent simply keeping tools in usable condition rather than in true rest or leisure. Even basic household tasks are transformed by these technological limitations. Cutting vegetables without sharp stainless steel knives is slower and more dangerous, with blades that lose their edge quickly and need constant sharpening. Washing clothes without detergents, running water, or machines is an exhaustive process of manual scrubbing on rough boards with soap made from ash and animal fat, barely removing deep stains and leaving a residual smell. Cooking without precise temperature control means constant vigilance and adjustments to avoid burnt or undercooked food. Textile technology is particularly rudimentary by modern standards. Before a single piece of clothing can be made, wool must be shorn by hand from sheep, carded, and spun into thread, a process consuming many hours, and then woven into cloth on a hand loom. Alternatively, linen starts as flax plants that must be grown, harvested, retted, a process of partial decomposition, beaten to extract fibers, combed, spun, and finally woven. Each step is labor-intensive, performed without automated machinery. Lighting, something you activate with the flip of a switch, is here a precious and inadequate resource. Handmade tallow candles provide dim light, constant smoke, and an unpleasant smell. Oil lamps are not much better. Torches offer more brightness, but with a greater risk of fire and even more smoke. The result is that any work requiring visual precision simply stops during the long nights, especially in winter. Storage technology is equally primitive. Without airtight containers, plastics, or refrigeration, preserving food requires labor-intensive techniques like salting, smoking, fermenting, and drying, all with variable results and significant risks of spoilage. Stored grains are constantly threatened by moisture, insects, and rodents. A storage failure does not mean mere inconvenience, but potential famine. Transportation perfectly illustrates the technological abyss. You are used to crossing continents in hours, communicating instantly worldwide, and receiving goods from distant countries in days. Here, speed is limited by human or animal pace. A 50-kilometer journey, something you would cover in 30 minutes by car, is at least a full day's travel, often more depending on the terrain and weather conditions. Roads, where they exist, are often little more than muddy tracks, almost impassable after heavy rains. Carts have wooden wheels without suspension, turning every journey into a painful ordeal, as every bump is transmitted directly to the body. Rivers offer better transportation routes, but are subject to floods, droughts, and seasonal freezing. Medical technology is perhaps the most glaringly absent for your modern sensibilities. Surgical procedures, when performed, use inadequate tools without proper sterilization. There are no x-rays to diagnose fractures, microscopes to identify pathogens, or blood tests to detect deficiencies. Teeth are extracted with brutal pliers without anesthesia beyond alcohol. Fractures are set manually, often imperfectly, leading to permanent deformities. The psychological impact of these technological limitations is profound. In your world, you expect problems to have solutions, tools to work as advertised, and tasks to become progressively easier through innovation. In the medieval world, there is a fundamental acceptance of life's inherent difficulty, an understanding that struggling against limitations is a permanent state, not a temporary phase before a solution is found. Creativity and ingenuity still exist. Medieval people were by no means less intelligent than modern ones, but their efforts are directed at incremental improvements within severe constraints, not the kind of revolutionary leaps you consider normal. A medieval artisan might dedicate a lifetime to perfecting a process that reduces the manufacturing time of a tool by 10%, a significant advance in their context, but almost imperceptible by modern efficiency metrics. The transmission of knowledge is equally limited. Without standardized manuals, instructional videos, or online forums, skills are learned through long apprenticeships, direct observation, and trial and error. Crucial techniques can be lost when master artisans die before fully passing on their knowledge. The reinvention of already discovered solutions is common in geographically separate areas. As you struggle with the poorly balanced hammer, trying to drive a hand-forged nail into a rough, irregular board, an older peasant gently takes it from you and, in minutes, completes the task you failed at in an hour. His muscles, developed over decades of performing these specific movements, know exactly how to compensate for the tool's deficiencies. His calloused hands barely feel what gave you painful blisters. You then realize that human adaptation is the most important technology in this world. Where tools are inadequate, the body and mind develop to compensate. Hands form calluses precisely where tools exert the most pressure. Muscles strengthen in the exact patterns needed for specific tasks, and minds memorize countless small adjustments and techniques that no one has ever documented in a manual. This embodied adaptation is something you, a modern person, simply do not possess. Your hands are soft. Your muscles developed for completely different movements. Your mind trained to expect solutions rather than accept and work within limitations. In a world where technology fails to compensate for human deficiencies, your lack of physical adaptation is one more reason why you wouldn't last a day in the Middle Ages. The next morning, you wake to a commotion in the village square. Joining the rapidly forming crowd, you find a disturbing scene. A young man kneeling before the feudal lord's officer, while an announcement is made. The young man was caught stealing a sack of grain from a neighbor's barn during the chaos following the attack. What follows is your introduction to the medieval justice system. a system so alien to your modern understanding of rights, due process, and humane punishment that you can barely process what you are witnessing. In your 21st century world, you are accustomed to a judicial system with professional police, trained lawyers, impartial judges, jury trials, and prisons as the primary form of punishment. Innocence is presumed until guilt is proven, evidence is meticulously examined, and punishment aims to be proportional to the crime. In the Middle Ages, almost none of these elements exist. There is no dedicated police force. Minor village crimes are handled by the local council or the feudal lord himself. More serious crimes fall under the jurisdiction of manorial, ecclesiastical, or royal courts, depending on the nature of the offense and the status of the parties. The investigation of facts rarely involves detailed investigation or forensic analysis. Confessions, often obtained under coercion or torture, are considered irrefutable proof. Testimony from individuals of higher status carries more weight than that of lower status. A defendant's prior reputation may be more important in determining the outcome than any specific facts of the case. When evidence is ambiguous, ordeals might be used. Procedures supposedly supervised by God to reveal the truth. These could include the ordeal by water, where the accused is bound and thrown into water. Sinking is considered a sign of innocence, as pure water accepts an innocent person. The ordeal by fire, holding a hot iron with the wound examined days later for signs of infection indicating guilt, or trial by combat, where the accuser and accused or their champions fight, with God presumably ensuring the victory of the innocent party. For the simple case you are now witnessing, however, such measures are not necessary. The young man was caught in the act. There are multiple witnesses, and he confessed immediately. The question's not guilt, but punishment, and in this aspect, medieval justice is particularly alien to your modern sensibility. Punishments aim not only at retribution or deterrence, but at public humiliation, permanent physical marking, and often brutal spectacle. The sentence is pronounced quickly. The young man will receive 15 public lashes, have his right ear cut off to mark him as a thief, and his family must pay 3 times the value of the stolen grain. If they cannot pay, they will be expelled from their land. Before you can fully process the horror of this sentence, the punishment begins. There is no delay for appeals, no waiting period in a cell. The boy is tied to a post in the center of the square, his shirt torn, and the flogging begins as the entire village is forced to watch. What shocks you most is not just the brutality of the punishment, but the resigned acceptance of the crowd. No one protests or questions the justice of the sentence. Even the boy's parents, though clearly distraught, remain silently submissive. In your world, such punishment would be considered cruel and unusual, a grotesque violation of human rights. Here it is just the natural order of things. As the blood runs down the young man's back and his screams echo through the square, you begin to understand another dimension of medieval life that makes your survival almost impossible. The complete absence of legal protections that you consider basic. In the Middle Ages, the concept of rights as you understand them simply does not exist. People have obligations, duties, and responsibilities defined by their social position and feudal relations, not inherent rights as human beings. The very idea that everyone is born with certain inalienable rights would be incomprehensible to the medieval mind. The body, which you consider inviolable except under extreme, strictly regulated circumstances, is seen as a legitimate place to inscribe punishment. Mutilation as justice, cutting off the hands of thieves, the tongues of blasphemers, the ears of repeat offenders, is not considered cruel, but appropriately retributive and preventative, both punishing the crime and visibly marking the offender to warn others. When the flogging ends, the second part of the sentence comes. A man approaches with a sharp knife. Assistants hold the boy's head steady, and in one swift movement, his right ear is cut off, eliciting a new wave of agonized screams. The ear is then nailed to the post in the square, where it will remain as a warning until it rots or is eaten by birds. The severity of punishments is partly explained by the absence of prisons as long-term correctional institutions. Despite the popular image of medieval dungeons, prolonged incarceration was rarely used as punishment in itself. Prisons existed mainly to hold people temporarily until trial, punishment, or payment of a debt. Keeping prisoners long-term was simply too expensive and impractical. Instead, punishments tended to be immediate, corporal, and conclusive. Fines and compensation for minor crimes, mutilation and branding for intermediate offenses. Banishment, a virtual death sentence in a society where independent survival was almost impossible. For serious crimes, and execution, often in elaborately brutal ways for the most grievous offenses. Executions were conducted publicly as educational and entertaining spectacles. Hangings, beheadings, burnings for heretics, drawing and quartering for traitors, all designed to maximize both the suffering of the condemned and the impact on the spectators. Entire families, including children, were expected to attend as part of their moral and civic education. Justice also varied drastically by social status. A noble who killed a peasant might escape with a fine. A peasant who killed a noble would certainly face torture, followed by a horrific execution. Foreigners, religious minorities, and social outcasts received even less protection, often serving as convenient scapegoats for unsolved crimes or unexplained calamities. After the incident of the punishment, I noticed a small caravan of merchants arriving at the village, bringing supplies and news from the outside world. As they stayed, I heard fascinating stories about a great distant city. Some young villagers, desperate after the recent attack, began to whisper about fleeing there in search of a better life. With my modern historical perspective, I know something they do not. Medieval cities are not the paradises they imagine. Approaching one, the first thing that would strike me would be the high walls and guarded gates. To enter, I would have to pay fees and convince the guards that I am not a threat. Inside, the senses would be bombarded. The smell would be unbearable. Human and animal waste, fetid tanneries, blood from slaughterhouses. The streets are narrow, muddy, and chaotic, without sidewalks or lighting. At night, the danger increases, and violating the curfew could mean imprisonment. The houses are cramped, built vertically, often of wood, a constant fire risk. Water is scarce and contaminated, and diseases spread quickly. Urban life is as harsh as rural life, just in different ways. The young villagers dream of freedom, but without skills or money, they would end up as exploited laborers, beggars, or criminals. I also observed how children live here. A 6-year-old girl takes care of a baby alone while cooking. An 8-year-old boy wields a sickle like an adult. In the Middle Ages, childhood as we know it does not exist. Children are integrated into work from an early age, exposed to constant dangers. Infant mortality is high, and parents, though loving, must be practical in a world where survival is uncertain. Death, in turn, is a constant presence. When an elderly woman in the village dies, her body is washed and watched over at home, with the community actively participating in the ritual. Burials are quick, and grief is a collective, not individual, process. Mortality is so frequent that people live with an acute awareness of finitude, something that in my time we often avoid thinking about. Living here has made me realize how much modernity protects us. Clean water, medicine, safety, and prolonged childhoods are unimaginable luxuries for them. While the villagers dream of the city as an escape, I know that no place in this time offers the safety and comfort we have today. And in the end, I realize that even with all my knowledge, I would be as vulnerable as they are, or even more so. Medieval life is brutal, but it also shows how people find meaning even in adversity. And that makes me value the invisible privileges of the modern world even more.